I'm Noah Carter, the owner, and I've been creating something unbreakable for the past 10 years. I'm 35 years old, CEO of Carter Holdings, a global investment company with interests in everything from private equity to real estate. I had to fight for every inch, every contract, and every chance, since I was not given equity, power, or riches. Years ago, I was simply another aspirational businessman, not the man I am now. I was married to a woman at the time and was working hard to succeed. Isabella Moore, who I believed would be by my side no matter what, was stunning, bright, and determined. However, she had one fatal flaw. She was more driven to succeed than to be loyal. Carter Holdings was only getting started at the time, and even though I had talent and vision, I wasn't the man in charge. Isabella was not yet, but she was impatient with a man who was still building an empire. Liam Preston entered the picture because she wanted a man who already had one. Imagine a hedge fund manager that embodied everything Isabella stood for. He had a smooth tongue and an outrageous amount of money. She desired quick riches, ostentatious luxury, and instant authority. And so, she departed. I vividly recall the evening she left. Sitting across from me at our dining table, her fingers traced the rim of her wine glass as she carefully selected her words. "Noah, I don't think this is working anymore." Her voice was composed, almost practiced. When I looked at her, I could see it in her eyes. She had already decided. She was already gone. The question that had been haunting me for weeks finally came out. "Is there someone else?" She hesitated for a split second before sidestepping. "I just want a different life," she said. "I want stability." That was all the answer I needed. She wanted to be with someone who could provide her with the life she believed she deserved. And in that moment I knew I had been nothing more than a stepping stone for her. She recognized my drive and ambition, but she wasn't willing to wait for the big payoff. Instead, she sought a shortcut, which Liam provided. She packed her bags that evening and disappeared into a world of private planes, lavish holidays, and the kind of flimsy glitz she had always craved. I let her go. For 3 years, I channeled every ounce of my energy into Carter Holdings. While she flaunted her lavish lifestyle and attended elite galas, I was working on blueprints for skyscrapers. But time changes everything. She never would have imagined that I would one day be sitting in a glass-walled conference room, surrounded by senior executives and legal teams, reviewing the contract before me. Preston Holdings, a $2 billion deal, one of the largest investment agreements of the decade, and they had no idea that I had the final say. On the other side of this transaction, Liam and Isabella believed they were about to secure an investment that would elevate their business to new heights. I could already picture Liam's arrogance and Isabella's confident smile. They thought they were untouchable. They didn't realize that Carter Holdings wasn't just another investor at the table. I had waited a long time for this moment. Watched as Liam Preston and Isabella continued their extravagant lifestyle, sitting in the shadows of an opulent high-rise bar. In their own conceit, they were oblivious to my presence. Liam had always been the type to flaunt wealth he hadn't truly earned. Unlike me, who had built my empire through tireless effort and smart risks, Liam had merely inherited his fortune and gambled it away like a spoiled child. Leaning back in his chair, swirling his whiskey, he spoke loudly enough for everyone to hear. "This deal will define the next decade. If Carter Holdings wants in, they'd better prove they deserve a seat at the table." His arrogance almost made me laugh. Isabella sat beside him, stunning in a designer gown, playing the role of the high society woman she had always aspired to be. But even from across the room, I could see the tightness around her eyes. She needed reassurance that she had made the right choice all those years ago. She never looked back when she left me. She was confident I would fade into obscurity. She thought she belonged at the top. But here we were, and neither of them realized that the company they were courting for investment was mine. that the people they had dismissed as minor players were, in fact, taking their cues from me. Liam took another sip of his drink and smirked. Carter Holdings isn't as strong as people think. They've been growing, sure, but they need this deal. Without us, they won't break into this market. I exchanged a glance with my CFO, Lucas, who was nursing a bourbon beside me. He smirked and whispered, "These guys really have no idea." I tapped my fingers against my glass. They don't. Liam and Isabella carried on, blissfully unaware. They believed they were in control. Isabella's voice rang out confidently. "Once Carter Holdings signs, we'll be unstoppable." She had always been like this, clinging to power like a vine to the tallest tree, shifting her allegiance whenever she sensed a stronger branch. And now, she believed she was on the winning side again. Lucas leaned in. "Should we give them a taste of what's coming?" I smiled. "Let them enjoy this moment a little longer. The higher they think they are, the harder they'll fall." Liam raised his glass in a self-assured toast to the future, still unaware of what was about to happen. I lifted mine in return and whispered under my breath, "To the future." Because in less than 24 hours, I would own theirs. "You believe you can come in here and embarrass me out of anger because he spat? But you—" I tilted my head and said, "Can you just take away my deal?" I don't think I know Liam. His nostrils flared, and Isabella's barely restrained rage made his whole body shiver. Seeing how badly this was unfolding, she said urgently, "Liam, stop grabbing his arm. This isn't the place." But Liam didn't listen. He tore his arm away and screamed as she released her hold. Stepping forward, he jabbed a finger at me. "You were nothing when she left you," he spat. "Nothing. And now, since you believe you're superior to me, I've let the insult go." I stared directly into his angry gaze, unfazed and unmoved. "I'm not impressed. You believe I'm superior to you?" I moved closer, lowering my voice just enough to make my words more impactful. "I am." Gasps and whispers erupted across the room, tension crackling in the air like electricity. Liam went crazy, his face contorted in utter fury. For a few seconds, I sincerely believed he was about to hit someone. His hands trembled at his sides, his body vibrating with unrestrained rage. But then he remembered where he was. Who was watching? Investors, executives, members of the media, his so-called allies. They were hesitant now. I could see it on their faces. Liam's downfall was happening in the open, not behind closed doors, and he was powerless to stop it at. Last, his face flushed with shame and his breathing grew labored. After what seemed like a lifetime, he gave a brief, bitter laugh. "You'll regret this," he whispered, his voice laced with venom. I held his gaze, steady and unfazed. "I won't regret this at all, Liam." His jaw tightened. Without another word, he turned abruptly, pushing past the onlookers as he stormed out of the room. His teeth clenched so tightly, I feared they might snap. Isabella stood frozen, torn between chasing after him or staying to salvage her reputation in the ballroom. But she knew it was too late. Her perfect life had just crumbled, and as she turned back to face me, something flickered in her eyes. Not rage, not even hatred, just sorrow. She let out a shaky exhale, then pivoted on her heel and trailed after Liam. As soon as they disappeared, the whispers resumed. Louder this time. Lucas smirked, raising his glass in a quiet toast. "Legendary," he murmured. I simply accepted it, taking another sip of my whiskey, unaffected. Because this was just the beginning. Liam Preston thought he was untouchable, thought he held all the power. But now, he was learning the truth. By the time I arrived at my office the next morning, the effects of last night's catastrophe were already rippling through the market. Preston Holdings stock had plummeted 30% within hours. Major investors were panicking, pulling out. Financial news outlets were calling it the biggest corporate embarrassment of the year, and I hadn't even made a move yet. sitting at my desk, reading the latest headlines. I wasn't surprised when Lucas strolled into my office, coffee in hand, a smirk on his face. "Not even 24 hours, he chuckled, "and you've already destroyed the man." I pushed back in my chair, smirking. "Lucas, he destroyed himself." Lucas shook his head, still amused. "The board's in full panic mode. Half of them are blaming him for losing the Carter Holdings deal, and the other half is desperately searching for a way to save their sinking ship." I exhaled calmly, completely at ease. "They reached out to one of their biggest stakeholders this morning," Lucas continued. "But he's already looking for an exit strategy." I let out a quiet chuckle. Liam had spent years convincing everyone he was invincible, that he would always win. But now, with one contract lost, the cracks in his empire were impossible to ignore. Lucas tossed a folder onto my desk. "You'll want to see this," he said. Flipping it open, I scanned the contents and whistled low. It was worse than I expected. Liam hadn't just lost Carter Holdings. The authorities were finally catching up to him. Reckless spending, financial mismanagement, using company funds to finance his own lavish lifestyle without the board's authorization, and now, without a financial safety net, he was bleeding out. Fast. Lucas laughed. "Think he still believes he can talk his way out of this?" I shook my head. "Not this time." For years, I'd watched men like Liam Preston rise to the top on arrogance and deceit, convinced that if they pretended to be kings long enough, no one would ever see them fall. But the truth is, once you strip away the illusion, all they have left is fear. Right on cue, my phone buzzed. Caller ID flashed a familiar name. Lucas grinned. "Let me guess." I nodded. "Liam." "The man himself," I answered, leaning back in my chair. On the other end, Liam forced a laugh, thin, unsteady, desperate, clinging to whatever was left of his bravado. "Listen," he said. "About last night," I smirked. "You know," I said, amused, "everything went exactly as it should have." Liam exhaled sharply. "Come on," he said, voice tight. "We don't have to be enemies." I let the silence stretch. Let him sweat. Then finally I spoke. "Is that why your investors are withdrawing?" Liam inhaled sharply. "You think you're so damn smart, don't you?" He growled. I could hear the fury in his breath. "You act like you're above everyone else," he spat. "But let me tell you something. You're not." I chuckled. "Funny. People used to say the same thing about you." Liam lost it. "You may have embarrassed me," he snapped, "but I'm still standing." I shook my head. Not for long. By mid-afternoon, Preston Holdings' stock had fallen another 15%. The board had called an emergency meeting. Rumors of financial misconduct had reached the SEC. Liam was drowning, and for the first time in his life, he had no way out. That evening, at precisely 7:42 p.m., Liam entered the boardroom for what would be his final meeting. His shoulders were squared, his posture rigid, but his eyes wide, panicked. He had spent his entire career walking into rooms as the man in charge. But tonight, his own board members weren't looking at him as their leader. They were looking at a liability, and they were ready to cut him loose.